So when the clock strikes noon, and actually I'm a little surprised, I'm not seeing the closed captioning. Yes, now I am, which is great. And the clock has now struck noon. So perhaps, Joanne, you'd like to be the first to introduce yourself? Joanne, yes. Oh no, you're not muted. I don't know why I can't hear you.
Hear me now.
Yes, yes.
There we go.
I'll do it that way then. Hello, I am Joanne Beckeris. I have used painting as well as poetry in my healing process. I was diagnosed with stage 2A ovarian cancer, and I worked closely with Mikhail, and it's nice to see everybody here.
Good, good. And since Joanne mentioned you, Mikhail, perhaps you'd like to be the next one to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mikhail O'Donnell. I work at the Roger Maris Cancer Center as their art specialist. I run their healing arts program. And our program mainly serves to create opportunities for people to be expressive and create meaningful art.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Alicia, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Swanson, and I am a nurse and a nurse educator. I'm faculty here at MSUM in our nursing department. I'm very passionate about integrative health and holistic practices and different ways that we can really engage in those types of practices. I am a consumer of those integrative practices myself, and I'm really excited to be here to discuss it further.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Great.
And Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Clancy. I'm a film faculty at MSUM, and I make work about addiction, taking a personal lens. I'm a recovering addict, so yeah, I sort of integrate my own experiences with the experiences of others using documentary and staging and a little bit of everything to explore that topic.
Wonderful. And Kevin?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Zepper, and I am currently housed in the Department of English. And my other connections are with the topic we have here are I went through core shamanism training and have been familiar with that practice for 6-7 years now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to get started with the first question. And Kevin, since you were the last to introduce yourself, perhaps you would be the first to respond to this question, and then we'll go around and hear from all the others. And as I said, if at any moment you want to respond to each other, have some spontaneous dialogue, please do so. I will say this first question is a little long. It has a lengthy preamble, but I will give it all to you, and you can just respond as you wish. The arts cover a wide range, from the visual arts to literary arts, musical arts, and so on. And each of these general categories includes many subcategories. For instance, the visual arts can include drawing, painting, sculpting with clay or other materials, while literary arts can include writing essays, writing poetry, writing fiction, and so on. Although creativity, imagination, and expressiveness are part of all the arts, each category and subcategory also has special qualities of its own. How would you describe the distinguishing characteristics of particular subsets of the arts with which you have worked, and also the characteristics that you see as underlying all the arts?
This sounds almost like a compare and contrast essay, doesn't it? Let's see here. Well, I read through this question many times to try to come up with something fairly condensed in my own opinion. I think that the harmony of these healing arts is there's this idea of touching and a physicality, no matter how small or large. I feel that there's this idea of the senses being used, the abstract brain. For me, no surprise, the subset or subgenre I pick first is writing. I mean, physically writing with a stylus of some kind, and paper or like a tablet screen. And the reason, particularly with paper and pen or pencil, is the immediacy of it. Who doesn't have a notepad? Who doesn't have a free pen they've received to begin writing? And I say that over typing because there's this impact, there's this connection with the pen to the paper and writing, and that's for me, I guess. That's the way I would. For me, that's it's just the simplest practice when I think of the healing arts.
Laura, you're muted.
I just realized that. I can't resist interjecting here. I know that Lynn Ender, one of our colleagues in the English department, has said that he writes the first draft of all of his novels by hand, and he writes substantial novels. So I mean, very impressed that someone would write by hand such a significant amount as the basis for a really important piece of work. And I can see the immediacy that you talked about, the brain and the hand working together.
If I could build on that with visual arts a little bit, I agree, you know, that touch and that feel is so important. And I think also like the seeing of those things is important too, even the seeing of words on a page, or the seeing of drips of watercolor, or the feeling of molding clay. Those things coming together, they create and emote kind of a feeling.
Yes.
And I think the feeling that comes out of that is something that is across all platforms of the arts, and they maybe come to you differently, whether it's hearing with music, you know, the touching with the hand, with literature, you know, reading, and then visual arts, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And when reading this question, and just kind of reflecting on everything in my profession and nursing is a healing art in itself. And when you talk about utilizing your senses, nurses assess the situation with all of our senses and kind of taking it all in and then making those connections and really caring for the client holistically, right? Body, mind, spirit, and really utilizing those arts to really bring it all together in kind of that healing, and going beyond curing, but you know, knowing that there's that other realm of being able to have that innate healing environment that we're such a big part of. And it really is really an honor and a privilege to be a part of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe quickly to build on that, what everybody's saying too sort of brings to mind this idea that like the process is more important than the product, right? The process of creating, of writing something, of making a film, whatever it is, and the product is sort of just secondary to that, right? Like, yeah, you may share it and other people experience it, but for yourself as the maker, that process is so important, and it's oftentimes the thing that like leads to the most growth and teaches you these lessons. And yeah, I think that's maybe Kevin would agree with that too. How writing on paper like that, it's a completely different process than typing something out.
Right. And I think it also, it kind of allows you to be present, right? So truly present in the moment. You're not future, past necessarily, but you're present too. I think that can really have a healing component as well.
And Joanne, you have experience both with painting and then also with writing. And how do you feel about these ideas?
For myself, the painting came first. Actually, collage came before the painting because collage is easy to do. Almost anybody can take pieces of paper and create something from it. So I started with that. The painting came second, and I chose for my medium acrylic painting because it's heavy and I felt the heaviness of the cancer diagnosis. So I chose that. And then you can also do layers. So I could cover up some of the feelings that I had felt and worked through. But for me, the painting came first. Words are hard for me because I was diagnosed with PTSD and I actually freeze. So words don't come naturally for me. But from the painting, I moved into the writing about my paintings, and then actually creating poetry about my paintings and about the feelings and emotions that I've been through during this whole cancer journey.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked earlier about the fact that some of your paintings are actually behind you now.
Yes, they are.
The screen. So very beautiful and very powerful. I'm struck by how vivid the colors are, very rich colors.
A lot of emotion in a cancer diagnosis.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And those colors show that emotion.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know we talked about, you know, what comes to the end of creating something, and that the process is important, but also I wanted to mention that Joanne had an exhibition of all her paintings during that time. Probably, was it around 40 or more?
It was quite a few. It was two. Yeah.
Yeah. And and you know, I don't know if you would agree. I think so, that showing that artwork was also part of your process of healing.
It was part of my process of healing. I think it probably helped a lot of the cancer patients that took the time to actually look at what I had written about my process. And I think it also helped the medical professionals, the medical staff that was in the area. I had several of them come up and talk to me about the actual fact that I found transformation in a cancer diagnosis.
And I think that's one aspect of the healing arts that we don't always pay as much attention to as we should. The fact that people who work in healing, and Alicia, you would certainly know this, it's tremendously challenging and difficult for them also to be dealing with such emotions and in the face of suffering and having to constantly be strong and giving. That must be tremendously, tremendously draining and challenging. And I would imagine they also require healing just because of the healing work they do.
Yes, self-care and really engaging in those types of things to prevent burnout, right? Because we are giving of ourselves constantly. We do need to protect our energy so that we, like you always hear, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
Making sure that that you are full and able to contribute and taking care of yourself so you can best care for others.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Perhaps I could move on to the next question now, which is just the healing power of the arts as a way to deal with both physical and emotional upsets, includes both the effect that creating art can have and also the effect that contemplating, listening to, reading an artwork can have. Is there a particular artwork of any kind, you know, for example, a poem, a painting, a song, whatever, that you yourself have experienced or observed being helpful in a time of distress?
I guess I can start.
Please do.
It really didn't take me too long to arrive at this, given the question. In fact, I was listening to this earlier. This is while I was in my teens, and as the teens are always so fun, you know, going through growing up and things, and all of that growing and whatnot. And a friend of mine introduced me to this artist by the name of Brian Eno, and he played for me this album because I just love music. He played for me this album called Music for Airports. Music for Airports is considered to be the first true, deliberate ambient album. And the idea is of the album is to create an atmosphere. And the atmosphere of this particular work, there's 4 segments to it, is to create a very calm space. So wherever you're at, could be in your bedroom, wherever you're relaxing, it really gets into your fiber, just this calmness. And the interesting thing about this that ties in with our healing arts here is he developed this concept while recovering from an injury in the hospital. A friend of his had brought in an album of harp music so that he could have something to listen to, but the friend kept the volume down so low he could only hear maybe the loudest parts of harp music. And then outside it was an English rain, so he was hearing this kind of combination of this English rain and these occasional notes of the harp, and he realized this is something. And so that's where he developed this whole premise of this kind of healing music, or music that's, it gives you some space to like sit back and think, or to create, or to to de-stress, to detox, whatever you would like to call it. So
Kevin, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it reminds me a lot of something I read recently about Ben Franklin, who created the glass, or a glass harmonica. And it was rumored that he healed people with it. And there was even a princess, can't think of her name. I want to say like Isabel or something like that, who was on her deathbed and she heard it. He played it for her and she lived another 60 years. And so she claims to be healed by it, but I just thought it was so relevant to what you're saying, how music can change our mental chemistry in those ways. And even with my own patients that I work with, when we're going to start creating together, I usually try to set the scene with some instrumental music, and I purposely choose music without vocals, because vocals can be so enticing towards certain mental states. It's good to be able to build on your own, but with just the instruments. So that's usually how I start off that creative period. And even adding on to that, I know the question was along the lines of art that is therapeutic, or is it in a time of distress? I'm trying to remember exactly. But so some of the projects that I've seen have worked really well to help have like a calming effect, help with stress and anxiety, and even like physical pain, relief just with that distraction. The mental distraction is like paint pour, even like blocking in colors, even just that action of filling within the lines and placing colors next to each other, even if there isn't a specific rhyme or reason. Seems to be very helpful. Seems to work really well.
To bounce off what you just said, the harmonica was really an interesting instrument. To describe it, it's like you've heard people playing water glasses, right? So, and going around the rim. Well, Franklin created a whole keyboard with glasses, I think, on their side, and it means so that the glasses would rotate in water, so you'd never have to keep re-wetting. So you just use your palms of your hands to use it. A doctor thought it would be the cure-all, kind of like in the 1700s, thought there was something magic about it. And what the truth was, it was the sound that it created, which is it's got kind of a celestial sound to it. It's you should check that out on YouTube afterwards. There's some really good demonstrations, and I think there's a guy that actually dresses up as Franklin when he plays it. And but it's really remarkable, and it kind of could be the precursor to what we have, like the crystal singing bowls and those kinds of things that are good for therapy as well. So way cool.
Yeah.
one of the sort of artists or piece of work that I wrote down for this was just the works of Oliver Sacks. And he wrote a book called Musicophilia, and it's all about how, you know, music is used in the healing of certain neurological disorders and these sorts of things. And there was a story about a man who was struck by lightning at 40 years old, and he had never played piano in his life. And for some reason, after he had been struck by lightning, he just knew how to play the piano and became a concert pianist. Like, and it was this like incredible thing that happened, but it's just full of stories like that. And it connected to this other thing that I'm interested in a lot right now, which is Elvin Lucier, who's a sort of sound artist, or was a sound artist. And in 1969, he went to this lecture at MIT where Bose was displaying this new speaker system that they had developed. And he started thinking about it and how like the resonance of a room would affect a piece of audio. So if you play audio in one room, it's going to sound very different than another room. So he had a speech impediment, and he thought, could I speak into something and create some kind of loop where the resonance of the room takes over and removes my speech impediment? So he speaks into a microphone. Basically, he describes the experiment. And then he plays that recording and then records it. And then that second recording plays it and re-records it, re-records it, re-records it. And eventually you lose all semblance of his speech. And in the only thing that's left over is the pattern and the rhythm projecting the resonance of the room. Okay. So in fact, that speech impediment that he had makes it almost more beautiful, right? Because we're hearing those kind of like unusual ups and downs in this almost ambient track. And this was done in 1969. But what he did was he toured this. And so what he would go to different museums and gallery spaces, and he would re-perform the same experiment over and over and over again. And people would be there and watch, and their own sort of like chattering and the small noises in the spaces would affect that final recording, right? And it was like this collective contribution to this really beautiful piece of music. I have my students do it now. Each one of them has to make their own Lucier experiment. And I just find that for them, it like completely reshapes the way that they engage with the space, that they understand a space, they practice deeper listening, right? Like, what are the little sounds that are happening in here that I wouldn't normally recognize? And to have that relationship with a space that's normally just so mundane and usual, really sort of expands their lives and their experiences, right?
I love that. I love too, like it kind of brings about that energetic frequency, right? And how certain frequencies can be so healing, right? And very intimate, right? For each one of us. And so I think about you know, observing in times of distress, what it makes me think of also as music therapy, sound therapy, working in long-term care with residents that have dementia. And so you maybe it's a little reminiscent memories, you know, good memories associated with a particular song, those kinds of things where they're maybe having a really rough time. We're able to put on music that makes them completely turn around and really feel alive again. And then again, just in conjunction with other therapies like movements, right, with your body and dancing and those kinds of things too. In fact, I know I've seen a video of an individual that had dementia that they played like one of her ballet. She was a ballet dancer, and they played music of one of her very famous ballet dances, and she was able to dance her performance at that time, and just how that impact of music and how that can be very healing and transforming.
And Joanne, what did you want to add?
When I think about different poems that are helpful for me, I think Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. I mean, that's a very, very powerful poem.
Yes.
Keep Calm and Breathe by Anne Stevenson also. And anything by Mary Oliver is good. As far as artwork goes, I can just sit down and look at a flower abstract by Georgia O'Keeffe and just get into it. Oh, so beautiful. And then another one that I kind of like is Several Circles by Vasily Kandinsky. That's actually, he's one of my favorite artists. As far as music goes, Native American flute music. Oh my, is that healing? Very, very healing. Mozart's Clarinet Concerto too. And then I can sit and look at a photograph by Ansel Adams and just fall into it. I mean, it's just gorgeous. Either him or Elliot Porter. So any of those can draw me in.
You know, I'm struck, Joanne, you know, when you talk about Ansel Adams or, you know, the flower abstracts by Georgia O'Keeffe and so on, another thing that, you know, people discuss a lot these days is the healing power of nature. And of course, sometimes people in hospitals, you know, very hard for them to really enter nature, but through these arts, they're able to experience nature in a way vicariously, even if they're not able, even if they're hooked up to machines, even if they can't go outside, there can be that natural presence through the presence of art in their room.
Yes, you're so right. And even when I was going through infusions and had very, very little energy, you know, I put on some music and in my mind, I'd be dancing. So you can use your imagination to do what you physically can't do at the time.
Exactly.
Mhm. I could even use my 3-year-old as an example for that. Sometimes when, you know, he's having one of those days and we just decide to get out of the house and take a walk and look at some leaves and smell some of the flowers and take a peek at the river, and walk back and breathe in that air. It just is a completely 180 for both of us.
Yes.
You know, all of a sudden we're calm and we'd like some tea and get on with our day.
Yes.
So it works for all ages. Nature, you know, our nature's healing.
Are we ready to move on to the next question, or do people have more to say? Okay, well, we'll move on. And this is, we have been talking about artworks, particular artworks. This is a more expansive question along the same lines. Do you yourself have a favorite art form or a form of creative expression? Like, you know, is painting your absolute favorite, or you know, writing poetry, or, you know, what would it be? Or if not necessarily creating, then contemplating. You know, are you more inclined to pick up a book of poetry, or to watch a really powerful movie, or to listen to a really wonderful piece of music? Which would you turn to first, just in the form?
Well, I know for me, I immediately turn to illustration. I love taking an idea or a story specifically. I love being able to create characters, you know, freehand different environments, just see how I can use, you know, colors to emote a feeling, expressions to create conversation. There's so much in an illustration that just energizes me personally and allows me to be expressive about how I feel. So for me, I think that's the big one. If I'm thinking a little bit more about expressing when it's more of a feeling that I'm trying to express and less an idea, I actually really like paint pouring, which happens to be one of the most popular practices that we do at the clinic. And I even grabbed one really quick here before we started.
Oh,
Because some of you might not know what paint pouring is, and so I can kind of
raise
show
my
you.
hand. I do not know. I do not.
Yeah, you
Okay,
know,
please.
so what I love about it is that you're taking colors and you're choosing these colors, and you can be spontaneous about it, or you can choose colors based on how you're feeling, or a feeling you want to show. And it's a little bit of science because you get to mix it with some paint conditioner. You get to choose how you lay it into a cup or lay it onto a canvas. And I think the overall therapeutic beauty of it is being able to release control. And I think that's the biggest thing, is releasing control, because you have to with paint pour, because that paint wants to do what it wants to do. And you get to just watch it do it. So you have a little control, and if you do it a lot, you can really take a little bit of control, but ultimately it's that paint's decision. So this is an example of one that I have. So that's created just by putting paint in a cup and setting it down, you know, pouring it and then moving the canvas. And you can really come up with some very interesting feelings and textures. I don't know. What do you think? Like, what does this make you feel when you see this? Or what does it remind you of? You know, even just the discussion with yourself after you create something can bring out, you know, bring out some ideas and feelings.
You know,
Hiroshige.
sorry, go ahead, Kevin, please.
I was just gonna say, it reminds me of Hiroshige, the waves.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I could see that. Yeah.
I thought of the sea also. I thought of a body of water. That's what I thought of when I saw that.
And I really thought of like tree roots being grounded and
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like the inside of a rock when you crack it open and it has, you know, like an agate or something, and it
Like
has a
little geodes and cells.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Joanne,
I love that you all see different things.
Joanne, how about you?
I see clouds and mountains.
Oh. But we all see something natural. We all see a part of the natural world. Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, oh, sorry, Alicia, did you have something? I don't want
you go ahead, Ryan. It's fine.
to. Yeah, so I think as a filmmaker, the reason I think I turned toward film to sort of explore conversations about addiction or feelings related to addiction is I started kind of like, I decided I was going to do it when I was in treatment. And you go to these meetings, right? And in the meetings, what you're attempting to do is like find language for an experience that feels like there is no proper language to actually describe, right? When you're in meetings, oftentimes they use kind of terms for people who aren't addicts. And so it's always kind of corny stuff like normies or whatever. And what I began to realize is like, it's because so many people who are addicts have such a tough time communicating with their loved ones, their partners, their family about what it feels like to be addicted to something. I started thinking that was, I think it's wrong to think of it in that way, right? Because that experience of addiction actually contains experiences that most of us have, right? Most everybody has. Like this feeling of disconnect from the body, right? Like the body is forcing you to want something that your brain is like, no, I shouldn't be doing this, right? There's so many things contained in addiction that everyone can relate to. But I still, regardless, found it incredibly tough to vocalize all of these things. And I began to think like, maybe the cinematic language is a better way to express these experiences. You don't have to say anything directly. Instead, you just allow people to sort of be immersed in this thing. So the first film that I had made about addiction was called Oliver Sees Indigo, and it's based on this scientist Oliver Sacks, who said that he, when he was in college, heard about the color indigo not having a hex number. There's no single definition of the color indigo. So instead, it just rests somewhere between the deepest of blues and the deepest of purples. But it's been described that there is a true indigo. It's just that we can't experience it through our, normal reality. So he said he thought he might be able to see true indigo if he took a bunch of drugs. So he actually was at the time making his own hallucinogenic drugs. And so he made this sort of concoction. He took a bunch of them and he sat in his living room and he closed his eyes and he just said, indigo, 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 indigo. And then he opened his eyes and he said this pear-shaped blob of the true indigo was floating in front of him, that it was the color of heaven. But it ended. It went away so quickly. It was this like fleeting experience that only could occur because he was high, right? But I started thinking about that. And so the film that I ended up making, the first like 5 minutes of it is just sort of like pulsating between all the different forms of indigo while these like prayer bowls are playing and they're being layered, right? And the idea is like, could I somehow mimic that experience without the presence of drugs, right? Can people experience this thing just by sitting in a theater together, having this collective experience? And, like to that point of the product being, part of the healing experience too, the fact that I got to like share it in theaters and watch it with people was certainly like an incredibly important thing for me, because it brought up other ideas that I maybe originally hadn't thought of. It allowed people to describe their own connections with addiction, all of these things just through sitting with the color indigo, right? It was such a simple, basic thing. But yeah, so I think that cinematic language somehow allowing me and others to convey emotions, experiences that language just can't quite capture, is what connects me to it or draws me to it.
Interesting. And it seems to me that the experience of an hallucinogenic drug, I mean, that in itself is something that everyone says you really can't express it in language. So it's almost as though you're using this artistic medium to capture something and share with other people who may or may not have experienced it themselves, that otherwise would be completely incomprehensible, completely not able to be understood by others.
Yeah, now hallucinogenics are such a big sort of pharmaceutical therapy that's being used, right, for addiction, for just about every ailment, it seems. Yeah, I think that's just that point.
I'll chime in now. I initially put down the answer for 3 as being in terms of creative expression. That's what we're on, correct?
Yes, yes.
I'm not into time. Creative expression, initially I just wrote down writing, but after listening to everybody express what's going on, I guess in terms of creativity, I like the ability to play, whether it is with words on a page or sketching. A long time ago, my friend was a filmmaker. He went to Columbia. He told me about what pure film was, so I made a couple of those, which was a lot of fun, drawing directly on the leader of film. I still am sort of a closet musician. I do my best with what I play, and again, it's the playing with sound. It's, to steal the phrase, bending sound, and I think Frank Zappa said, pushing the air, building an air sculpture out of sound. And so for me, it's just the ability to give myself permission to play. And I mean, for me, just in that space, in terms of healing, first of all, I feel like I'm 5 years old again. In fact, I've been reminded I act a lot like I'm 5 years old. But the truth is, there is that there's no barrier. I want to make these colors. Is this the right red? No, I need to make it redder. What if I throw in yellow and I make this off orange with these, So for me, I get, I could, the easy answer is writing, but I just like the ability to have these different possibilities to play with, because even if I'm just playing with paint and I'm just playing around with it, it might evoke an idea that will come to writing, or maybe it will evoke a musical thing that I can put over here, or who knows, maybe it's a scene of a movie that hasn't been made yet. So favorite, I don't know, it's real I guess what time are we talking about? Whenever any one of them can pop up, I guess. For me, it's just the idea of being in the process of playing.
Right. And what you're saying, what popped into my mind was freedom to be creative without judgment, right? Like just like letting it just take you a place where you couldn't have like even imagined, right? Like so just kind of letting your innate self kind of guide the way. And so I think that's really powerful. And I love that. I love that ability to have that freedom to really be creative and be fully immersed in that without that layer of judgment and overthinking it, right? And so and just to answer that question about my favorite form of expression when it comes to art, I would say back to music. I love music. I've always loved singing in particular, and I love to sing and dance, even though maybe, again, no judgment, right? I think it's really powerful for me, and the type of music that I even listen to and sing along with really influences my mood, and just everything about it. It really influences the environment in which I kind of thrive in, and those kinds of things too.
Can you sing for us? Just kidding. I mean, you can.
Oh, I didn't prepare a piece. I have to think about it, maybe later.
Okay.
And Joanne, you mentioned that you went to painting first. Is painting still your first love, or is it?
I tend to rotate depending on how my gut feels on that particular day. I will pick up some paper and do some collage. I will pick up a paintbrush and do some acrylic painting or some watercolor painting. If I feel lighter that day, then I tend to head towards the watercolor painting. If it's a heavy emotional day, then I tend to move towards the acrylic painting. But I also like to do mixed media. So and fiber arts. So I tend to rotate depending on how I actually feel. I can't say that I have one particular one that I go to most of the time.
And you've brought up something very important there with your mention of the fiber arts, because I've used as examples just a handful of the arts that are out there, but fiber arts are becoming more and more important. I mean, there are people who are just crafting incredible, not clothes, but they call them wearables, or knit items that are just exquisite. I mean, quilting is now recognized and displayed in museums. So there are all kinds of other arts beyond the ones that we're traditionally used to, which is really important to remember.
And it's really interesting too. I've read too that different types of fabrics have different frequencies, and like when you're wearing them and when you're engaging with them, then it gives off a different, obviously, vibe, right? So that can be very powerful.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. And this again has a rather lengthy preamble, but I'll just try to go through it quickly. As someone in an English department, I've read mythic and legendary accounts of the art's healing powers, such as the fact that the Greek god Apollo was god of music and poetry, and also the god of healing. However, I have no knowledge of how and when modern medicine started integrating the arts into a holistic treatment of patients, and how that integration is going on today. Would you share some thoughts about the role of the arts in modern medicine? And maybe Alicia, you could start us off here.
I sure can. As I mentioned before, I'm really passionate about integrative nursing, integrative healthcare. So that really does combine that that conventional medicine, Western medicine, with complementary and alternative therapies in a very coordinated fashion, right? There's such power in that. And so what, when I'm thinking about the role of the arts in modern medicine, those therapies, a lot of them are healing arts therapies when you think of them, and there's a whole buffet of them. And in my dreamy world, it would be that no matter where you go or you land in, you're seeking some kind of healthcare, right? That you would have a buffet of options that you could select from. And again, like Joanne's saying, some days you may feel like this is what kind of resonates with you versus that. And for us to be able to engage in our own unique ways of being able to heal and to, again, because a lot of what brought me to the healing arts and different types of therapies in my own personal life was because that standalone Western medicine was not cutting it, and I needed to be able to integrate. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunity. I feel like we're scratching the surface, and I feel like now we've got some traditional medical systems that have been around for thousands of years that have been integrated with our Western medicine that have been very powerful in that integration. So I look forward to the future in just further harnessing that.
Yes. And Kevin, your shamanic studies might be relevant here, because that is the shamanic healing is one of the traditional healing systems that we just referred to, Alicia, I think.
Well, I think what's interesting is just bouncing off what Alicia said, but I completely agree with everything she says, because we've had many of these conversations. We go back, I don't know, we met in the early 60s, I think, is when we met. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the idea of the mind, body, spirit thing is very prominent in the studies of shamanic healing. The idea of shamanism isn't unique to any one culture. Every culture has had some sort of has come from a tribe or a clan, and there was this spiritual healer, not necessarily the chief or religious. They crossed over into something that would be more, I don't know, psychology almost to a certain extent, and using things like what we've called like healing touch, or that if something is off in the spirit, there's something off in the body or emotionally, or to form that triad. Some of the things that are involved with shamanism clearly is drumming, this idea of a regular rhythm that creates this, heading back to this idea of sound, this intonation of this beat and the different kinds of beats that there are. The idea that there is some chanting going on as well, which is something that goes back. I mean, that's in Western music. It's something that we are familiar with. So those kinds of things are, I think that in terms of the arts, or calling the arts, I think that they are, by degrees they are. I don't think they're completely so, but there is the dancing. There's dancing involved. And anybody can do this. It's not like there's a specific dance step. There's sharing stories around a fire. I mean, so there's that, the idea of the narrative, and the idea of going on the journey, and what do we see coming back from the journey, and how do we reuse that? And so those are some of the tools that are used for this aspect of healing, healing the spiritual, healing the body and emotion. I was also thinking of more recently this last year is working at Eventide and the role of arts in medicine, in that here's this whole group of people who are in retirement living under care, and they do have some access to the arts. But when I offered a memoir class last year, and you can't believe how these people opened up. They really wanted to share these things. And I said, if you're not sharing these with family, share them with yourselves. And there was a woman there who, and what happened with her is she said she doesn't talk at all. She just wants to be here. She had her paper and she wrote a few lines. And all of a sudden, because we were all sharing and everything, all of a sudden it was like she opened up. And this is a dementia patient. And she opened up and everything was clear. And she remembered all these details and everything. So, and in indirect ways, somebody opened up. It was like releasing it was incredible. The nurse that was there, the attendees, is just like, oh my goodness, she hasn't done this in a long time. So the idea of the narrative, which is, I think, crosses a lot of lines, the idea of the writing, that's where I see it specifically in my own work. So I hope did that make any sense? It sounded kind of jumbly bumbly to me, but
It made perfect sense. It made perfect sense. Yeah.
Maybe just because I'm not in the medical field, and the way that I sort of tried to process this question or interpret it was just through, I guess, my own engagement with this topic. So again, when I was in treatment, I got really lucky to be set up with this psychiatrist who would do these pilgrimages to India. And he's Indian, and would take people there that were recovering addicts and kind of do this like spiritual retreat with them. I wasn't able to go, but we did have long conversations, and he sort of took me through a lot of these ideas. And one of the things that he had mentioned is this like convergence of spirituality and science. And what he introduced me to these ideas, that it was really wild to me that these things happen to the body that cause everyday impacts, right? But you, as the one experiencing it, don't know what's actually going on, right? So an example is when you're using drugs, specifically opioids, on a daily basis, your brain stops producing oxytocin, which is that hormone, right, or chemical that is like the connection, the love chemical. It's the thing your brain releases when you first see your mother. And so your brain stops producing it in the way that it used to, right? So you might hear a beautiful song and your brain releases oxytocin. You pet your dog, your brain produces oxytocin. But now when you're using drugs, the only time it produces oxytocin is when you're using that drug, right? So when you suddenly stop, right, and you start practicing sobriety, your brain takes a really long time to regulate that production of oxytocin again. And so they recommend you do not form any new relationships within the first 6 months to 2 years of your sobriety, because you can't trust your emotional connections. And again, like I didn't know that about myself or my body, but I was experiencing those things, right? I would like feel so connected to this person that I hardly knew, or I would not be able to sort of like feel that love for people that I truly did love before. And so his recommendation to me was like, use your films as a way to start forming those connections again, right? Like, and so that's what my effort was to find these like threads, these connections between myself and others, both those people that are addicts and people that aren't, and have it be that sort of therapy that helped me understand what was going on in my body, my brain chemically, right? And then how that was affecting my everyday life.
Interesting. Very
I
interesting.
think that's so beautiful that, essentially you got to fall in love with those healing arts. Like that, those got to be your next first loves. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even to that point, it's like falling in love with the people that you already loved all over again.
Yeah.
You know, you have to like start from the beginning, and that it's not common that you get to do that. You get to understand, like, why do I love this person? What about them draws me to them, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And Joanne, you obviously have been through very rigorous medical treatment. And I'm wondering what your experience, I mean, obviously working with Mikhail, you did have those, integrative practices as part of your healing. Did you want to say anything about that, about how it worked for you to have that as part of your treatment?
That really, really helped as I was going through treatment, to be able to use that to regulate my emotions and learn how to actually recognize my emotions and deal with them and regulate them through the artwork that I was creating. I just can't thank Mikhail enough for her assistance, and Sanford for actually having that available to me. It made a huge difference, and I actually learned a lot, grew a lot, and actually transformed during that whole process.
Mm.
So thank you.
Thank you. Those words heal me.
Well, this is a kind of wonderful serendipity, but we're almost at the end of our time. And there's still one question left, but it actually seems to me that all of you have already answered that question through your comments in earlier questions, because to cut to the chase, the final question is, what was it that drew you to this union of the arts and healing? And I think all of you in some ways have touched upon that as we've had our discussion. So what I'd like to do now, in the little bit of time we have remaining, is just open things up and just ask you, anything else you want to say, anything else you want to observe, anything else you'd like to share?
I would like to share. In kind of a response to that question is, what brought me to healing arts was my students. When I began teaching 20 some years ago, just a straight up old English 101 class, composition, and I'd read through my papers, and my newly minted English teacher, and I'm reading, and I get to like paper 7 or number 8 or whatever, and it says, I recently came out, and I have not shared this with my parents. So as a teacher, I was shared this information before their parents. Mm-hmm. Or another paper is, this is the first full week I haven't cut myself. And I never asked them for this information. They just seem to volunteer it. And it's almost like, I don't know what it is. It's almost as if, here you go, write about, and be respectful and everything. And so, I mean, I remember going to then, I think it was Sue Ellen Shaw, and talking to her about, what do I do with this? It's like, you respect the writing and everything. It's like, but this wasn't asked. The assignment did not say, what was the worst possible thing what don't you want to tell anybody? The vehicle was already there. They felt comfortable and they started writing. And I'm not the only, this isn't exclusive to me. I'm sure that, I don't know, there are other of my colleagues I know, Laura, may have happened to you too, where students have just opened up, and you wonder, what do you do with it? And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, I don't have a counseling degree or anything like that. It's sort of like you support the student, and this stuff still continues, which is why I think the arts are, I don't know, maybe it's just hardwired to this idea of healing. It's, it doesn't take a lot to get it moving. So.
If I could speak to that point, Kevin, because, I think I'm in that position you were when you first started, right? This is my second year here. And right before I came to teach here, I asked a mentor of mine, because I was making these works that were, I mean, exposed parts of my life that I wouldn't just go up to you and say. And so I said, you know, like, my students are going to see this stuff and they're going to know something about me that could be troubling for them, or it's a difficult topic. And his thing was like, you know, you made the decision to be vulnerable, right? Like, that's your work. You have to lean into it. You have to allow the students to sort of engage with it in their own way, and don't back away from it. And so that's what I did. I always do a presentation in my class about my work, and I bring this up, right? And the only responses I've ever received are positive ones, right? Students who then feel like they want to share things about themselves through their own work, and it's usually this very productive experience. Last week, I got a message from the dean of students saying that a student, because of this, decided that they were going to go into treatment, and they have very strict parents. They don't want their parents to know, and they put me down as their point of contact. And again, it's like, I'm not their I'm their professor, right? And like, what role are we supposed to play in their lives? Where do you start crossing lines, right? And it's still this thing that I'm working through, but it felt like I was just so glad that this person felt like they were able to seek treatment and care about their health and well-being, because they then felt like there was someone that they were comfortable enough with to put down, right? They needed that support. We may never talk about it, right? But just that they felt comfortable enough to seek treatment because there was someone there for them, right? I think was really important and touching.
Yeah, that gave me goosebumps. I just, like, how powerful is that? And I just think, like, that vulnerability opens up, I think, for relationships and connections, right?
One of the things that I've always heard and believe that the arts can do, or different artworks, is let people know they're not alone. Whatever struggles they're going through, whatever troubles they're having, other people have experienced similar things, and feelings and emotions that they find very challenging, that they may be a little reluctant to admit they have, other people have also had. And maybe that knowledge of not being alone is one of the most important things the arts can provide. Well, I don't want to be the last person to speak in this panel. So, and we are actually even a little over time. So does anyone want to offer the final statement?
Well,
I'd
maybe
take a
just a
lead,
thanks
yeah.
to you, Laura, for
Yeah,
putting
thanks,
this together.
Laura.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Kevin. Made the
Yeah, thanks,
decision.
Laura.
Yes, thank you so much for
Well,
getting us together.
thank all of you. Thank you very, very much. It's been
Yes,
fantastic.
and I've been a part of this, made me feel so loved and accepted. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
Next time, could we do a real-time potluck or something, or?
Oh, yeah.
Good. But anyway, thank you again. Thank you so much. And I will end the meeting now, but thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. It was
Thank
a pleasure.
you. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you. Take care.